Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Litton Center for History and the Public Good, I'd like to welcome you to our first event for spring 2021. In just a few moments, Dr. Kyle Livy, one of the other co-directors for the Litton Center, will introduce our wonderful speaker. But first, for some of you who don't know what the Litton Center is, I'd like to just briefly read you our mission statement. So the Litton Center considers ways that the study of the past can help shape the present and future. Our mission is to inspire the Ohlone community to work for the public good through programming focused on access, equity, inclusion, service, and justice. The Litton Center explores challenges facing our community and the world, past, present, and future, and fosters big ideas that will inspire and transform Ohlone and the larger community for the better. Through training, programming, and capacity building, the Litton Center empowers students to advocate for a just and equitable world. And again, thank you for joining us today, myself, Catherine Michael, Kyle Livy, and Heather McCarty, the other co-director of the Litton Center.
Of course, I was muted. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kyle Livy. I'm a professor of history at Ohlone College and co-director of the Litton Center for History and the Public Good. It's my honor today to introduce our speaker, Dr. María Villaseñor. Before I introduce our speaker, who is our very first Litton Center Scholar in Residence here at Ohlone College, I want to encourage you to, as you're following this talk, to ask questions using our Q&A feature here in the Zoom webinar. You will find that at the very bottom of the screen. This is a place where you can ask questions or express ideas that we can talk about later on during the Q&A once the talk is completed. If you'd like, you can also send questions to our email, littoncenter@ohlone.edu, and we'll post messages reminding you about this as the talk proceeds. Okay, now on to the show. Let me introduce Dr. Villaseñor. Dr. Villaseñor is Professor of Chicanx and Latinx Studies at California State University, Monterey Bay, where she has been a faculty member since 2006. Dr. Villaseñor holds an undergraduate, master's, and PhD degree, all from the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Villaseñor teaches courses in Chicanx and Latinx Studies and Comparative Ethnic Studies, and is a co-author of the Historical Dictionary of U.S. Latino Literature, which was published in 2017. Creative nonfiction and memoir are research interests, teaching interests, and creative interests as well. Her essays have appeared in Remezcla, the Acentos Review, and Full Grown People. Dr. Villaseñor is a faculty associate in the Office of Inclusive Excellence at CSUMB, and in 2015 was named an outstanding first-year student advocate by the National Resource Center for First-Year Experience and Students in Transition. She is a lifelong Californian, like me, a twin, and a mother of twins. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Villaseñor.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to thank Ohlone College and the Litton Center for the invitation today, and I want to express my appreciation to the faculty, students, and staff of Ohlone College. This week, they've given me a really warm welcome, and so thank you very much. And in preparing for today, Dr. Livy suggested that I share a little bit about my background and educational journey with you all. And I've known Dr. Livy for a long time, and I've been taking all of his suggestions since the 1990s. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. And the other reason besides his suggestion that I thought this was appropriate is that, as you know, the title of today's talk is 19th Century Latinas, Autobiography and Authority. And I thought, why not start with a contemporary Latina autobiography that can be very brief. I'm not going to tell you every single thing about my life. But I grew up in the Sacramento area with a mom and stepdad that immigrated from Mexico, and a dad who was born in San Francisco and grew up going back and forth between Sacramento and Tijuana. And forgive me if you've seen this photo before. On the left-hand side of your screen here on this slide, I shared it with the MECHA students earlier this week, but this is me in 1989, the year my mom and my stepdad decided to repatriate, to move our family to Mexico permanently. And the permanent move lasted about a year. The idea of going back to one's home country is frequently a lot more difficult and complicated than folks think it's going to be. And that certainly was the case for my parents. So we only lived there for a year. But that year really changed my life in that it helped me understand myself first as a Mexican person, and later as I studied a lot of Chicanx studies as a transnational Chicana. Living in Mexico and among other Mexicans really erased the narrative that I had about myself as a racial other and as a maligned minority. I'm here to tell you that unfortunately, internalized racism is a real and powerful thing. And living in Mexico did a lot to reduce the effects for me of carrying that burden. And I came back really interested in learning more about Mexico. And later I discovered Chicanismo and Chicanx Studies, and that was it for me. And I was hooked. I went on to attend UC Berkeley, and I earned a bachelor's degree in English, and I minored in ethnic studies. Majoring in English taught me a lot, and it helped me build the skills I needed for graduate school. And ultimately, it also taught me that I did not want to get a PhD in English. Years later, and it was quite a few years later, I earned a PhD in ethnic studies doing comparative research in Chicanx and Filipinx diaspora literature and history. And it was the dissertation writing and research that I did that really gave birth to my interest in the 19th century. I wrote a chapter on one of the writers that I'm talking about today, María Villaseñor. So I've been interested in this time period for a long time. And that was where I started that research. All the while, I worked as a writing tutor and in various other positions at UC Berkeley Student Learning Center, the place that really became my home at UC Berkeley. Working in the Student Learning Center taught me that teaching and mentoring students was the thing that brought me the greatest satisfaction. And to this day, teaching and mentoring are the most joyful and rewarding parts of my career now that I'm a professor at Cal State Monterey Bay. And this second photo here in the slide is me on the day of my PhD graduation. I also have shown some students this photo before this week. So this is me. This is my twin sister. I'm a fraternal twin. And these are my two younger brothers, who many say look more like twins than my sister and I do, but alas, they are not twins, but these are my siblings. And then later, of course, now I'm a professor at Cal State Monterey Bay. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but I just want to show you this image, this third photo on the slide, kind of in the middle to the right. This is a group of students that I went to the Steinbeck Center with to do a reading of autobiografías. My students do autobiographical work themselves, and this was a reading that I organized for them. And on the far right is a picture. So my favorite thing about my job is working with students, and my second favorite thing is being able to snag the occasional photo op with Monty. So here on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see me and Monty Ray. And for those of you who are students in the audience, I already said this to another group, but I will tell you that if you transfer to Cal State Monterey Bay, there will be many, many wonderful things for you to experience there. It's a wonderful campus, but one of the things you will have to endure is a lot of otter puns. We have a lot of otter puns. We're obsessed with otters, and I'm not immune to that. There I am with Monty Ray. So here, the last thing I want to mention with regards to my background is that at CSU Monterey Bay, I teach two courses that are explicitly about Latinx autobiographical writing, and one that is specifically about Latina autobiographical writing. And I incorporate studies of autobiographical writing in one way or another into most of the many classes I teach. I noticed at one point years ago that autobiographical writing is my favorite thing to read for fun. And here on this slide, I took, like 5 minutes to just put, I did kind of a free association. What are my favorite books that I read in the past couple of years? And I put them all here, and all of this is autobiographical writing. It's my favorite thing to read for fun. It's my primary research interest now, and it's what I like to teach most. Through all this reading, teaching, and researching, I discovered that I wanted to produce autobiographical work myself. And so now this has also become a creative interest of mine. Now I write about my own life, and I always encourage students to write and talk about their lives too. The Chicana writer Gloria Anzaldúa once wrote, and I have the quote here on the slide if you want to read along with me, "I write to record what others erase when I speak, to rewrite the stories others have miswritten about me and about you, to become more intimate with myself and you, to discover myself, to preserve myself, to make myself, to achieve self-autonomy." And by and large, these are the reasons I write, and the reasons I write about myself, and the reasons I study Latinx autobiography and autobiographical writing. Folks, unfortunately, we cannot trust that the history and stories others will write about us and our peoples will express the truths of our experience. And this belief underlies my reasons for my own writing, but it also explains why I think we should care about what other Latinas and other marginalized people say and have said historically. And really, that is what the bulk of my talk is going to be about today. Okay. So with that, I'm going to start in perhaps an unlikely place for a talk about 19th century Latinas, and that is in 2021. Why? Because I think with my students, whenever we talk about some of these older time periods, I think it's important to kind of make the connection to present day issues. Why should we care about what the Latinas of the past said? And we can look to the experiences of the Latinas of the present for some clues about why we should care, right? In early February, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a 21st century Latina and a member of Congress from New York, posted an Instagram live video describing her experience on the day of the January 6th Capitol riots. She describes being terrified and reveals in the video that she's a survivor of sexual assault. And I'm going to play a brief clip of that video right now.
I just start to hear these yells of, "Where is she? Where is she?" And I just thought to myself, they got inside. And so I hide behind my door like this, like I'm here, and the bathroom door starts going like this. This was the moment where I thought everything was over. These folks who tell us to move on, that it's not a big deal, that we should forget what's happened, or even telling us to apologize. These are the same tactics of abusers. And I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And I haven't told many people that in my life. But when we go through trauma, trauma compounds on each other. I've hesitated to tell this story, has to do with some of that trauma. You know, as a survivor, I struggle with the idea of being believed.
So I want to now repeat, as I move on, I want to repeat something Ocasio-Cortez says in this video. She says, as a survivor, I struggle with the idea of being believed. And in the immediate aftermath of posting that video, the responses from the public showed that she had good reason for this fear. Ocasio-Cortez was immediately attacked called a liar and accused of fabricating that she had been in the Capitol. In fact, her office is not in the domed building that was stormed, but she never said it was. I will not go into the technicalities of the accusations of her detractors and why they're false, but suffice to say that they are. And here I've put in the slide an image of a tweet that somebody put up that it kind of exemplifies these attacks. This person says, hashtag AOC lied about being in the Capitol on January 6th, if you haven't heard. She's a complete fraud and delusional. I believe she's mentally ill. As a prominent Latina in a position of some power, the AOC's every move has been scrutinized from the day that she was inaugurated into elected office. Still, giving credit where credit is due, she has earned the admiration and the attention of many, in part because she's been so rhetorically skillful and so, and really a master of her story and a master of her words. Moreover, Ocasio-Cortez adeptly uses social media, that great democratizing tool of public storytelling, Instagram Live, to frequently share her words, ideas, experiences, and perspectives without an interfering interlocutor. And despite the existence and persistence of her naysayers, Ocasio-Cortez and only Ocasio-Cortez imbues her words with the authority of her ideas and her experience. The authority over her experience begins and ends with her, even when she fears she will not be believed, and even when that fear of not being believed indeed comes to pass. The 19th century was clearly a different historical moment, yet if recent political events have taught us anything, it's that many of the issues that were observable back then remain with us in the present. It was difficult to watch those television images of white rioters storming the Capitol, waving Confederate flags without thinking of the words of William Faulkner, who famously said that the past is not dead, it's not even past. Actually, I think I'm not gonna, well, maybe I will. Latinas in the 19th century communicated their experiences to the public in various ways, constrained by the norms, ideologies, and technologies of the historical moment. Issues of authority, who gets to be heard, understood, believed in speaking about one's experiences are critical to any study of autobiographical writing. Here, I would note that I often remind my students that experiences are not events or the things that happen to us. Experiences are the meanings that we attribute to those events through our own acts of interpretation. The 19th century was a period of incredible tumult and change all over the United States. Some of these changes, for example, the end of Spanish rule in New Spain and the transformation of New Spain to Mexico, and then to the United States as a result of US aggression and occupation of what is now the US Southwest in the span of just a few decades, left many people reeling. Thus, those whom today we would call Latinas lived through unparalleled social and political changes from the Spanish and Mexican periods to the establishment of the United States Southwest and beyond in the 19th century. And here, what I'm going to read is here at the top of the slide if you want to read along, partly because this is a really key part of I think, the context that we need to understand and think about as we talk about this in more detail. Amidst tremendous political turmoil, severe economic disruptions, social chaos, and personal loss, Latinas sought to document their lives and assert their subjectivities. How are we to understand their life stories in the present day? What clues are we offered for piecing together narratives about their lives from existing documents and their own words? And what barriers exist for deepening our understanding of who they were, what they experienced, and what legacies they have left for us? Finally, how can we apply what we learn from the historical lessons of studying 19th century Latinas to our present moment? In unpacking and bringing to life some of the issues I've outlined here, I will briefly discuss 4 Latinas with narratives from different genres, highlighting some of the issues their lives and their narratives raise. First, however, it should be said that even today, the vast majority of Latinx literary studies are focused on the 20th century and 21st century contemporary works. Indeed, before Genaro Padilla's seminal book, My History, Not Yours, The Formation of Mexican-American Autobiography was published in 1993, there were no published major studies of 19th century Latinx autobiographical writing. Padilla came together with a group of scholars in the late 1980s to set out to recover what were largely the lost and buried writings of what they termed U.S. Hispanic writers in their Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage project. Here in the clip I'm going to show, Padilla talks about why and how they set out to recover these texts. Oops.
And I think for most of us, there was a great sense of urgency at being part of a collaborative that would recover, restore, translate, publish, and study a group of what I call, what many of us call the writings or the thinking or the historical presence of our antepasados. People who had written memoirs, who had written poetry, who had written essays, and all of that work existed. It appeared in various libraries and archives and small collections. And it was our mission to go and find that material, to pull it from the boxes in libraries, to work through the collections layer by layer, to bring some coherence to those stories. We'll call them stories, to those narratives, and to make them visible again, to publish them and to distribute them through communities, through our high schools, through our universities, with the adamant expectation that we would not lose our past, our history, that our history would not be erased, that our history would not be taken and flattened, and that it would disappear. Our purpose then, as now, as I see it, is to engage in that kind of recovery, recuperation, study, and distribution.
Padilla's words that the scholars came together with urgency and with the adamant expectation that our history would not be erased, would not be flattened, would not be disappeared, that we would not lose our past, bear repeating, as they underscore what is really at stake in conducting this work. Indeed, thanks to these scholars, those of us in the subsequent generations of scholars that have come up and are still coming up after this important work have the opportunity to build on their monumental undertaking. And what were and what are some of the challenges of conducting research in 19th century Latinx literature in general and research on 19th century Latinas in particular? Padilla alludes to the first significant challenge, which was the access to manuscripts that were not widely accessible because they had been forgotten in library archives for quite some time. Scholars that were part of the recovery project had to undertake what Padilla refers to in My History, Not Yours as, quote, an archaeological project. He writes eloquently and movingly about the widespread perception that Mexican Americans did not have autobiographical narratives, or indeed a literary tradition at all that predated the 20th century until the Recovery Project engaged in the work that it did in the 1980s and 1990s. In the following quote, Padilla speaks to some of this, echoing some of what he says in the video clip I just showed, and discussing some of the other issues plaguing the study of autobiographical work during this period. And here I'm going to read this passage that I have on the screen if you'd like to read along. Quote, traces of Mexican-American lives do indeed reside in autobiographical narratives that transform life history into textual permanence. Memoirs so long out of print they are nearly forgotten. Social and cultural histories in which the I enclosed itself in a language of topographic identity. Cultural practice and political intrigue, diaries, family histories, personal poetry, and collections of self-disclosing correspondence. Lives are scattered on broken pages, faded, partially lost on the margins. It's my intention, therefore, to initiate a recovery of that autobiographical formation that emerged after 1848. Memoirs out of print, autobiographical utterances spread out in miscellaneous forms, including diaries, correspondence, and poetry, etc. And furthermore, in the second clause, Padilla speaks to some of the other complications of the time period and the emergent and changing identities of Mexican Americans of the time. Without going into a lot of detail, it's really difficult to convey the full impact of the tremendous political, cultural, and economic changes that were occurring in both Latin America and the United States in the 1800s. These transformations were rapid and tumultuous as Latin American independence movements yielded independence and nationhood in Latin America, and the United States was moving full tilt to occupy and expand Northwest Mexico in order to create the US Southwest. The 19th century also sustained the Indian Wars, a Native American genocide, as well as the Civil War and the US conflict about whether the institution of chattel slavery would remain a bedrock of American life. Amidst all this, particularly for Mexicans in what is now the US Southwest, all these situations yielded big questions for the individual I's who produced autobiographical narratives, as well as for the collectives about which they wrote. What is an American? What is a Mexican? What's a Mexican American? A Cuban American, a Puerto Rican? All of these were real open questions back then and not merely rhetorical ones, especially for Mexicans who lived in what is now the US Southwest. Even the identity of Mexican was an elusive or difficult one. Tejanos, Californios, Nuevo Mexicanos, etc., had strong and enduring regional ties that were the identities that were most tied to their cultures and their sense of self. Identities at this time were upended, deconstructed, reconstructed, and in flux. A recurring theme in many autobiographical narratives of this time was ambivalence and a question of confused or non-existent belonging. Another complication in studying these writings historically is also highlighted in Padilla's words. He writes that Chicano literary studies was birthed by scholars ideologically wedded to progressive/leftist politics, and that in the past, the nostalgia and denial of some of the writings of that time, and even the class privilege of some of the authors. He mentions, for example, the wealth, power, and status of Mariano Vallejo and Angustias de la Guerra Ord, but we could even look at Maria Ruiz de Burton, who we'll talk about today, as an example of somebody whose relative wealth and privilege and elite status made them distasteful to the early Chicanx literary critics. Padilla's scholarship was groundbreaking in its ability to name and address the contradictions embedded in the subjectivities of these authors and their viewpoints. Given the author's dispossession and destabilization post-1848, when the US-Mexican War concluded and Northwest Mexico became the Southwest United States, Padilla urges the reader to consider that it is a wonder that these authors wrote or spoke their histories at all. With this in mind, I want to continue by highlighting three sort of case studies for thinking about issues of authorship and autobiography in terms of Latinas during this time period. So the first set of autobiographical writings I want to discuss for your consideration are the oral histories of Eulalia Perez and Apollonia Lorenzana. Say that 3 times fast. Apollonia Lorenzana, a beautiful name with many syllables. The oral histories of Perez and Lorenzana were collected by Enrique Cerruti and Thomas Savage in the 1870s during a 6-year period in which they collected almost 150 narratives, only 40 of which were given by women. Cerruti and Savage were tasked with interviewing people to help Hubert Bancroft complete his History of California. In the book Testimonios, Early California Through the Eyes of Women, 1815 to 1848, the volume editors Rosemarie Beebe and Robert Sienkiewicz note that in the process of completing interviews for this book, interviewing women was, quote, often an afterthought, as in 19th century America, men were usually regarded as the true makers of history. And this view, if anything, was even more pronounced in the male-dominated society that Gold Rush California had produced. Most of the women interviewed were from prominent landowning families, and the few that were not, such as Eulalia Perez and Apollonia Lorenzana, were referred by these other elite women from whom Cerruti and Savage had concrete information that they wanted to elicit. Experiences like Perez's and Lorenzana's were not of great interest to Cerruti and Savage. They literally often went to collect their stories when the elite women with whom they wanted to talk to were not available. And when they didn't have time, they would send them to these other women. In addition to this, Beebe and Sienkiewicz explained that Cerruti and Savage came to the interviews with a set of prepared questions, and that the men, quote, consciously attempted to direct all aspects of the conversation. And unfortunately, those of us who are women, maybe even today, have experienced this, men consciously trying to direct all aspects of conversation. So it's not hard to imagine that it would be happening back then in this dynamic, right? Yet the scholars note that the transcripts of these interviews reveal the women breaking through the boundaries within which the interviewers sought to limit the conversation. They add, quote, at times we can hear the women objecting to a new theme because they had not yet finished what they wanted to say about a particular topic, end quote. In another example of a filter that impacts how we read these women's words today is that after conducting these interviews, the interviewer would write the women's words down and prepare the interview document. Cerruti, Beebe, and Sienkiewicz share was more likely to take notes during the interview and would generate the write-up based on notes, while Savage attempted to write down more word for word what he was hearing. In the PBS documentary Latino Americans that dramatizes the interview encounter between Apollonia Lorenzana and Thomas Savage, we get a small glimpse that borders on the humorous into imagining what this interview encounter must have been like. As well, we learn about what the subjects of these interviews were like, and we also get a brief, in the clip I'm going to show you, we also get a brief discussion of the suffering and death of California Native peoples during the mission periods. I'm going to show you a brief clip from this Latino Americans. And just while I'm setting up the clip, I'll say really quick that we also get a very brief explanation or discussion of the importance of women like Lorenzana and Perez in terms of making the mission run and how much priests relied on them.
You think of the missions and you think of there's like one priest, and this one priest has the power to harness Native American labor, to educate. But actually, priests, particularly in California, relied on local women. You had people like Apollonia Lorenzana. The padres trusted her to board ships to get the necessary supplies for the missions. She supervised Indian seamstresses, supervised the cooking.
Yo misma me mantenía con el trabajo de mis manos. Yo bordaba bandas, chalecos. Yo cuidaba de la ropa de la iglesia. No solo de hacerla, sino de lavarla. Para lo que tenía indias lavanderas. Los indios que no cumplían con sus obligaciones eran castigados.
To understand the position of natives in the mission system, you have to understand the tremendous loss of life that Indian communities in California had experienced. When the Spanish come and introduce disease, those populations go into enormous demographic decline, leaving them very vulnerable. The missions offer the opportunity for Indian communities to have bread on the table. Some Indians were taken by Catholicism and by the promise of salvation. We know that many Indians oftentimes rebelled.
Los castigos eran encierro en el calabozo o en el cepo según la falta. Si este era un poco grave, les daban azotes.
Azotes.
Sí. Raras veces pasaban de 25.
So in addition to giving us a really rich account of the treatment of these indigenous peoples at the time and the sort of intermediary role that women like Eulalia Perez and Apollonia Lorenzana played between the overseers and the native peoples, as you know, they were supervising them in the kitchen and all of that. So in addition to giving us a sense of that dynamic, the reason I included this this short clip is because we also see the dynamic and the interaction dramatized, the interaction between Thomas Savage and Apollonia Lorenzana. So we see him kind of pausing, and we see what, you know, a dramatization of what Bibi and Senkowitz said that he would do, which is to try to capture exactly the words that his interview subjects were using. And so in the case of Apollonia Lorenzana, he clarifies, azotes, which are, you know, lashes, basically. So he stops and he repeats what she says, and you can see him kind of writing it down with, I'm not sure why, with a little bit of a funny expression on his face. I want to say too that issues of translation also figure into all of this, as these women spoke in Spanish. Thomas Savage and Subvert, of course, did speak Spanish. That's how they were able to interview them, but they translated their words into English. And Bibi and Senkowitz point out that previous publications of these women's words were often beset with mistranslations. And some examples of the errors are so bad that I'm just going to give you one. For example, in 1956 translation of Angustias de la Guerra Ord's testimonio stated that, quote, she and the other women of California favored the American takeover in 1846, when what she actually said was that she opposed it. So sort of in response to that kind of a pattern, Bibi and Senkowitz took it upon themselves to take the documents and retranslate them after they've been translated before. So beyond these filters and these issues, it should be noted that many of the women who were interviewed, including certainly Apollonia Lorenzana and Eulalia Perez, were quite advanced in their years. So the status of their memories and the trauma they endured when their world was literally turned upside down after the U.S. takeover also bears mentioning as we think about all the factors that could affect or even interfere with the meanings produced in some of these oral histories. Notwithstanding all of this, Apollonia Lorenzana and Eulalia Perez were extraordinary women whose lives and perspectives we know about as a result of these oral histories or testimonios, mediated though they were, and despite the numerous problems we have enumerated here. Apollonia Lorenzana was taken from Mexico to Mission San Diego when she was a teenager, an orphan given to the mission in 1808, working diligently within the mission system and ultimately given a land grant after the mission secularized. As historian Vicky Ruiz emphasizes in the video clip you saw, women like Lorenzana and Perez were really indispensable to the mission system as a colonial enterprise. Ultimately, however, like many Mexican California landowners, Lorenzana was dispossessed of her lands in the aftermath of the U.S. takeover of California. Expressing her dismay and indeed her anger and despair, she tells Thomas Savage what we see here on the screen, kind of in the middle. So that's the way it turns out, that after working so many years, after having acquired an estate, which I certainly didn't dispose of by selling or by any other means, here I find myself in the greatest of poverty, living only by the grace of God and through the charity of those who give me a mouthful to eat. Lorenzana actually knew Eulalia Perez, one of the other few working class women interviewed by Savage, and Savage apparently at the very end of his interview with Lorenzana asked if she knew how old Eulalia Perez actually was. He wanted to get the information from Lorenzana, what was her actual age, because this was one of the great mysteries about her. On the slide here, you can see this photo that gives her age as 139. And in her testimonial, Lorenzana says that Eulalia Perez was already a mature woman of 30 or more when she met her some 70 years before. Her death certificate gives her age of death as 140, but other estimates are that she died at 110 or 112, which is pretty good too. In Eulalia Perez's testimonio, she describes her life as an industrious midwife, the chief cook, and the supervisor at Mission San Gabriel, left alone to care for 5 children, though she eventually remarried, though seemingly reluctant to do so. According to Padilla, these narratives describe events before and during the Americanization of the territory from a gendered perspective that both criticizes patriarchal constraint in Mexican society and yet refutes common assumptions that Mexican women were not bothered by the conquest. Indeed, one of the reasons that there are not more narratives is because many women were so angry with the Americans that they simply refused to collaborate in giving their life stories. Indeed, this is an interesting point to consider, the varied ways in which these Mexican women expressed displeasure and anger at the American takeover, including withholding interviews from the American historians seeking to interview them. I'd like to conclude this section by briefly highlighting some of the problems of authorship and authority that we can glean from the example of the oral histories of Eulalia Perez and Apollonia Lorenzana. And this is simply sort of summing up what I've just talked about. Beebe and Senkowitz describe the number of filters that are put on their voices and experiences. The experiences these women shared were put into writing by men who fashioned their narratives by making choices about how they communicated their experiences. Oral histories are always necessarily mediated through the oral historians, but in this case, these women were Mexican and they were Spanish speakers, speaking to men who did not always share their backgrounds and who quite literally were dictating the terms of the conversation with selected questions, chosen translations, etc. Yet we know too that these women and the others interviewed found ways to make their points. And for all the problems outlined here, these oral histories are of critical importance as they give some glimpse into the women's subjectivities. The lack of certainty around Eulalia Perez's age is yet one mysterious detail that reminds us that the women shared what they wanted, told the stories they chose to tell, and revealed what they decided to reveal. Within a social structure in which so many things were out of their control, their narratives were within their control, even if only to an extent. Okay. Next, María Amparo Ruiz de Burton was born in 1832 in Ensenada, Mexico, Baja California. It was there that she met Captain Henry S. Burton, an invader who met Ruiz de Burton during the invasion. Ruiz de Burton left Baja California when it became clear that Baja California would remain a Mexican state as the U.S.-Mexico War drew to a close, and Alta California, where Monterey was, would become part of the United States. Henry S. Burton offered to a number of people to help them settle in Alta California, one of whom was the beautiful María Amparo, who we see here on the left-hand side. A year later, María Amparo and Henry S. would marry. Some describe theirs as a heretical marriage because she was a Catholic and he was a Protestant. Having come from the elite originally in marrying Henry S. Burton, who became a Union general in the Civil War, she maintained and perhaps in some ways even upgraded her status, having friendships with powerful figures like Mariano Vallejo and even Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of President Abraham Lincoln. Rista Burton published The Squatter and the Dawn, a novel in 1885 in San Francisco under the pseudonym C. Loyal, standing for Citizen Loyal, as well as other works. Her novel was the first literary text to be issued as part of the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage project in 1992, and few knew that she was the author until the 1990s when it was published. Rista Burton was the first Mexican-American to write and publish a book in English in the United States. Her letters were also edited and published in a collection in this same series published by Arte Público, with painstaking research by Rosaura Sanchez and Beatriz Pita. While she never published a memoir or autobiography, her fiction and her letters create a window into who she was, a learned, opinionated, well-connected woman who was deeply angry at the loss of status and wealth that she and people like her endured post-1848. A citizen loyal who published books as much because she had something to say as because she needed to make money after she lost her wealth in the aftermath of her husband's death and her loss of property after the US takeover. Rista Burton died in poverty like many other Californios, including Mariano Vallejo himself, who in the History of California described Rista Burton thusly: erudite y culta dama, celosa de la honra y tradiciones de su patria, valiosa esposa, cariñosa madre y leal amiga. A learned and cultured lady concerned with the honor and traditions of her land, worthy wife, loving mother, and loyal friend. The Squatter and the Dawn is a historical romance that centered on the relationship between the son of an Anglo squatter and the daughter of a wealthy Mexican Don, a character that some say is modeled after Mariano Vallejo himself. The novel, which José David Saldívar calls, quote, a love story and a national allegory for land loss in his book Border Matters, is significant in many ways, but Sanchez and Pita's noting of its place as the first account written in English from the perspective of conquered California is certainly key, particularly when put in the context of the many accounts that were written at the time as part of the Bancroft Project that we were just talking about. While the testimonios sought to narrate the history of the dispossession of the Californios, significantly they were told and mostly recorded by men, as we've just been discussing. Moreover, being told and recorded in Spanish meant that the testimonios were largely inaccessible to the largely monolingual Anglo public. In contrast, this novel is deeply critical of the United States in its treatment of the Californios in particular. In writing and publishing this scathing critique of the United States in English and with an English pseudonym, Rista Burton's choice of narrating the dispossession of the Californios in English is one that bears commenting on. To construct a historical account of the invasion and dispossession in the language of the invader, veiling this account within the guise of a romance novel, was both bold and strategic. Still, it could be said that in the time that it was written, Rista Burton's stringent critique of U.S. policies and corporate capitalism fell on deaf ears, as demonstrated by the lack of attention her novel received at the time of its publication. But while her novel was scarcely noticed by Rista Burton's contemporaries, its themes and its critical perspective make it a classic early work of Chicana literature. Importantly, as a Mexican woman writing mostly within the United States and publishing her novels in English, Rista Burton contended with US biases and racial and gender hierarchies. In their book, Conflicts of Interest, Sanchez and Pita astutely describe Rhys de Burton's position, arguing that Rhys de Burton was, quote, locked in an iron cage because of gender and nationality. Besides the two novels she wrote, Rhys de Burton's available writings are personal letters and not letters that were intended to be public documents. Although Rhys de Burton corresponded extensively with men, including men considered important and prestigious, and although her letters certainly contained strong political statements, it was not until the work of Sanchez and Pita that the letters were legitimated for study by publication. Yet the letters were opinionated and funny, and we are fortunate to have access to them today. In one of her letters to Mariano Vallejo, Rhys de Burton writes, quote, "Siento un verdadero odio y desprecio como buena mexicana por el tal manifest destiny. El manifest destiny no es otra cosa que manifest Yankee trick." And I didn't translate this, but basically she said she feels a real disdain and hatred for manifest destiny, which more than manifest destiny is no more than a manifest Yankee trick. These words express a clear anti-manifest destiny perspective, but also are alive with her personality and her humor. Rhys de Burton's status as an intellectual was not recognized until recently, especially because traditional ideas of what constitutes intellectual work would never include women's personal letters, especially for a Mexican woman in the 19th century. Yet today, we are able to study them precisely as the Chicana intellectual artifacts that they are. I want to say in closing this section that as I was preparing this talk, I was tempted to remove Rhys de Burton, given that the focus is on autobiographical writing in this presentation. Yet as I thought about it, I surfaced what I found to be an interesting question. Is it possible that, given the constraints on Rhys de Burton and others like her, that a novel, fiction written with a pseudonym that conveys the sense of an American white male author, provided a chance for her to express some of her deep truths more openly, more directly than other autobiographical forms of the time would have allowed? In writing about dispossessed California families as characters, was she able to approximate an expression of the anger and despair she experienced at her own dispossession more accurately and intimately than if she had published a memoir? If she had published a memoir, and here it is probably best to disrupt our speculation, since in the United States of the time, memoirs written and published by Latinas were few and far between, but if she had, it's likely that she would have been attacked. In sum, we should treasure Rhys de Burton's novels and letters that give us clear insight into her worldview and her sense of herself in these writings. In these writings, we have an example of a writer exerting her authority, engaging in powerful authorship, but only able to do so under the guise of a pseudonym, under the banner of citizen loyal. I wanted to talk about Loretta Janetta Velasquez today, and perhaps if I'm ever invited back, I will do just that. Loretta Janetta Velasquez was a woman, a Cuban-American woman who disguised herself as a man to fight for the Confederacy in the Civil War, and she wrote a memoir about it, as one would. But part of why she wrote a memoir about it was because she really needed money, and she was really attacked and discredited, and even contemporary authors have tried to discredit the truth of the experience that she shares there, but others like Jessie Aleman have corroborated the events that she narrates in her memoir. There's a film about Loretta Janetta Velasquez, which is kind of a documentary that uses a lot of the techniques of dramatization like I showed you with Apollonia Lorenzana, and that film is called Rebel. So I highly recommend that film. And with that, I'm going to move to conclude. So I want to close with returning to the title of this presentation, which asks, in whose words have authority? In highlighting the stories of the Latinas I've discussed today, may we be reminded of the need to excavate, to engage in archaeological projects to unearth the narratives of 19th century writers in order to better understand our antecedents and thus ourselves with more clarity, and paradoxically, with more complexity, understanding that the process of reconstructing these life stories in the past is about understanding a picture of who we are and where we come from more fully, even if what we learn does not square with our present day values, politics, and sensibilities. We should be ever mindful and attentive to the questions of whose words have authority. Indeed, with my students, one of the things I like to do is have us reflect on how the history that we study relates to us in the present moment. The Latinas whose stories I've shared today remind us of the need to keep creating pathways for Latinas and other women, especially Black, Indigenous, and women of color, for ourselves to share our stories, to use our voices, to be heard, to be believed, and to be recognized as the ultimate authorities over our lives, because we are. And I'll just end with this quote by Audre Lorde, who says, "When we speak, we are afraid of our words. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villaseñor, for an incredible talk. We're really excited now to move into the Q&A section, and I want to give a shout out and welcome to all of the folks who have joined us, students and colleagues all across the country, including and especially specific shout outs to our students here from CSUMB, from Professor Villaseñor's institution, and of course our students here from Ohlone College. And we're so happy to have you here. So we have a whole slew of really great questions. So I hope you're ready, Dr. Villaseñor, to answer some of these questions about your talk and about your experience. And I'm going to pass the mic over to my fellow co-director, Dr. Heather McCarty.
Thank you for that illuminating talk. We have had, as Kyle said, Dr. Olivia said, many questions come in, and we've had a few actually about defining terminology. So I've sort of pulled those together, and I would like to ask you to explain for the audience the term Chicanx, and then your definition for the word Chicana.
Thanks. So Chicana is a woman of Mexican heritage with a particular, so I guess the distinction between Mexican American and Chicana is that the word Chicana has to do with a strong sense of cultural identity, cultural pride, and a political perspective that is progressive. And Chicanx is a gender neutral term that in recent years has been taken up more by scholars and activists and members of the community, although not all, as a way to move beyond the gender binary of Chicano, embedded in the terms Chicano and Chicana. So we use Chicanx to provide an option outside of the Chicano-Chicana gender binary.
Great, thank you for clarifying that for everyone.
So our next questions are also going to be a combination of two questions. So you mentioned internalized racism at the beginning of your presentation. Can you define exactly what you meant? How or why did moving to Mexico change it for you? And then once you were at UC Berkeley, did you notice any misrepresentation of the community?
I didn't hear the second part of the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. I'll just re-say it. So you mentioned internalized racism at the beginning of your presentation. Can you define what you meant? And then how or why did moving to Mexico change that for you? And once you were at UC Berkeley, did you notice any misrepresentation of the Latina community?
So the definition of internalized racism, so we know that racism refers to a belief in the racial hierarchy where those who are white, identified as white by others and or who themselves identify as white are considered superior to other members of the community, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So that's racism, right? So internalized racism is an internal psychological belief that folks can sometimes take on when they are bombarded with the message of white superiority or white supremacy. So it's internalized racism is held by people who is sometimes, right? Not everybody suffers from it, but frequently people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color might experience a sense of their own worth being diminished because they are not white. So that's that. And then the other part was, did I notice misrepresentations of Latinas at Berkeley? Was that yes. The other question? Well, that's a great question. I'm going to have to think about that more. I'm not sure. There were some Latinas at Berkeley, and as we are out in the world, there was like a heterogeneous mix. You know, we weren't all the same. We had some different experiences. We had some shared experiences. I think more than misrepresentation, I saw that there wasn't a great deal of representation. Maybe what I saw was a lack of representation in the faculty, in the less so in the staff, but even in the staff, but in the faculty and the staff and in the certainly the administration, right? So I saw more than misrepresentation, lack of representation in terms of the people working there, and even in terms of the students. There weren't a ton of Latina students at Berkeley, though there were some of us, to be sure. And I think that was and is a goal of many at Berkeley to have a diverse representation of students there. But more than misrepresentation, I would say I saw some lack of representation.
Thank you for that. So we have some really great questions. I want to ask you, this came up during your talk. I understand that the autobiographies of these women are very important and interesting, but why did the men try to deviate and control the conversation? I'll take my answer off the air.
Well, I guess I am tempted to answer kind of in a flip way, but I won't do that. I'll answer like in a serious way. And if you want to, off the air, we can later discuss kind of like the joking answer, but the serious answer has to do with what I said, right? Which is at the time, and even to much less extent now, but at the time, the people that were considered important, the people that were considered historical actors, the people that made history were men, right? So women's perspectives and experiences in history at that time were totally secondary. I have to say that we are starting Women's History Month. That's why we have a Women's History Month, right? Because of the importance of centering women's experiences as historical actors and agents. But back then, that was not a thing. We did not have Women's History Month. We had history as the domain of men and men's words and ideas as important. As I said in the talk, one of the reasons that these men who were writing these histories were talking to women was because they were particularly interested in the elite women who were part of these families who knew stuff, who had documents, and they were actually often looking for documents. So they wanted to get something from them, and that's why they were controlling the conversation. They had a specific reason they wanted to talk with them. They thought, I was going to say, well, they didn't know what they didn't know, and that's true, but they had in mind exactly what they wanted to know, and they weren't really interested in the women's experiences or opinions outside of that. And that's really what's so powerful about these testimonios, is that in the face of an interaction where the women were being told that their opinions and their experiences were not important, or they weren't necessarily being told that explicitly, but it was being communicated to them all the time. These women were talking all about their experiences and giving their opinions. So they were sort of like breaking through that barrier of the men's perhaps less caring to make known what they lived through and what they thought.
Great, thank you. I have the next question, or this is actually two questions. There are actually a lot of source questions, so brace yourself. The first couple are two questions. Do you think the Latinas you discussed deliberately attempted to subvert dominant narratives about their various identities and experiences through their work? And who do you think their intended audiences were?
Can you read the first question again? Were they trying to subvert?
I sure can. Do you think the Latinas you discussed deliberately attempted to subvert dominant narratives about their various identities and experiences through their work?
So in the cases that I'm talking about were all kind of different. So and that was intentional. And I think with more time, I would love to kind of tie them together more or compare them, but I can kind of compare them a little bit now. So in the case of the women and giving the oral histories, the testimonios, the California women, I don't think they were necessarily trying to subvert dominant identities dominant narratives about their identities. But I think they were implicitly doing some of that by what I just was talking about, right? By sort of controlling, I think they were by controlling their own narrative story, as these men were asking these pre-prepared questions, I think they sort of implicitly subverted some of the things that, some of the dominant narratives about their identities in the case of the testimonios. In the case of María Villaseñor, I think she, like a lot of Californios who were dispossessed, had their lands taken away, she really had a very strong point of view and experience. She was really angry, and she was going to tell her story and kind of communicate some of that through this novel. And I don't think that was an intentional, she used a pseudonym. She had to use a pseudonym. I think she assumed that her identity was kind of not on the table as an author. So I think really, perhaps similar to the testimonios, if anything, it was sort of an implicit subversion through kind of finding a way to break through the barriers to her telling her truth and telling it in this novel. And then in the case of Loretta Janetta Velázquez and this constructed memoir, her whole life, she dressed as a man, like her whole life was about controlling the perception of her identity. So I think in her memoir, she was probably doing that as well, and that's really one of the differences between somebody who's writing a memoir with their own name on it and their own experience, as opposed to somebody who is communicating autobiographical experiences in different ways.
Great, thank you. And one more quick follow-up. Another one of the questions about sources was, based on the findings so far, would you say it's possible that there are more narratives out there waiting to be found?
I would say it's highly likely. Yeah, I think for folks who are interested in this area, that there is still a lot of work to be done, both with finding more of these kinds of buried sources and also translating and interpreting the sources that exist. I don't think we've exhausted the critical conversations about the sources that we know about either. So, yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, our next question is about the connection to current examples like the one you used regarding AOC. So do the social filters we see in these historical works become more pronounced today in the climate of constant, immediate, partisan media attention? Or do you think it gives the subject more chances to correct the record and speak openly?
Can you read that question again?
Yes. Okay, so do the social filters we see in these historical works become more pronounced today in the climate of constant partisan media attention? Or do you think it gives the subject more chances to correct the record and speak openly?
Well, I guess in some ways I have a kind of a simple answer that maybe is complicated. But I think, the encounter between reader and text is always mediated by the moment, right? By the social and historical moment that encounter between reader and text is happening. And so it's, in some ways, it's impossible for us to know if the texts are speaking more or less freely, because we're not privy to the information about what it was like to read these texts 100 years ago and what it will be like to read them 100 years from now. So it's kind of, I think that's a very good question. And unfortunately, it's kind of impossible to know the answer because we only know how we're reading it right now. And maybe how I cited scholarship from the 90s, right? Which was like the first scholarship on this. So we know how people were looking at it back then too. But besides that, we don't really know.
Thank you.
So the next question is a question in two parts, which, as Dr. Villaseñor knows, is actually two questions. So this first question comes from a student, and it's actually, the second question is really a follow-up. Dr. Villaseñor, you mentioned the importance of writing down your own history. Have you finished your own autobiography of your life so far?
No, no, I haven't. So far, I write memoir essays. I'm a memoirist and I write in the essay form, and that is the form that I love. I intend to continue writing memoir essays and hopefully publishing them. Yeah. And beyond that, I don't have an aspiration to write a full-on autobiography memoir kind of book. But I intend to continue writing kind of not my story, but my stories or my experiences. I intend to continue to engage with that because of why I said, because I think it's really important.
The follow-up kind of really, it actually goes really well with what you just said. I want to ask you a little bit about one of the experiences you referenced at the beginning of your talk, which is while you were a student at UC Berkeley, you were also a writing tutor. Can you talk about why that experience was so influential and rich for you? Because I think a lot of the students who are listening to this talk and following this talk right now are thinking about their own different kinds of career paths, and the moments or the kinds of positions that you take and how they influence your work. So could you talk a little bit about why that role in particular was important to your own path?
Well, there were a lot of things that were important about that time. I met and formed a relationship with Liz Keithley and Luisa Giulianetti, who some of you know and who I think might be on this call. I don't know. I quickly tried to scan the participants earlier. I wanted to know who was here, but I didn't get a chance to fully scan. But so they are mentors and teachers of mine and dear friends now. But I think that at the time, because of the courses, the tutor training courses that we were taking, and that's obviously how you and I met, that was the first time I read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think as a result of my being a student at the Student Learning Center and learning so much, I think I had a greater understanding of what was the possibility for education and higher education to be transformative. And also because tutoring is inherently a relational endeavor, I also understood that kind of the key to having transformative education was relationships. And so I think I cultivated a sense of myself as an educator that I knew that was going to be the most important thing for me, and that I was going to learn more and better ways to listen, to ask questions, and I think that's the most important thing I learned about being a tutor ask questions, ask good questions. And that's, I believe, the most important thing about being a professor, right? That you come, when you interact with a student, you're not necessarily there always to share your sage on the stage oracular wisdom. You're there to listen, and you're there to encounter this person or this classroom, and it's fresh and it's beautiful and it's always different. And that's what I learned at the Student Learning Center. That's what I learned from tutoring. So I think those are some of the reasons that it was really an formative experience for me.
Thank you for that response.
Okay, I have the next question, and I'm actually just went ahead and chatted it to you so that you can read along with me. Fear of not being believed, being a fraud, highlights the suspicion and the lens of illegitimacy through which minoritized individuals, especially those who dare to claim authority over their own lives, are dismissed. These experiences nurture the imposter syndrome many of us carry when we try to speak our own truth, no matter how inconvenient they may be to others, all too prepared to deny them. The power of narrative and autobiography you highlight affords a space for counter narratives. Do you see the tools available to dispel claims of fraud are more limited for minoritized writers than mainstream writers whose heritage, race, gender, and identity are not marginalized?
Yeah, I love that question. I don't know, though. I think it's a great question. I don't think so. And partly, okay, I'll say what I think, but I want to be clear that I really don't know. I don't think so because we do have, every generation that we have now is more and more diverse, right? So, you know, like when millennials were coming up in filling our college classrooms, it was like millennials were the most diverse generation in history. And then Gen Z came, and Gen Z is the most diverse generation in history, and on from there, right? Like the generations are getting increasingly diverse. So I think that because readers are becoming more diverse, that I don't know that our tools available to dispel claims of fraud are more limited because, and because we do have social media, right? That Twitter and even to a certain extent Instagram, but there are these platforms that allow people to, when somebody calls the AOC a fraud, immediately we all rally around and we say, no, she's not, you know? So I think the diversity of readership and the fact that we have also more diverse writers writing and the kind of democratization of the platforms, all of those things I think mean that that perhaps not, you know, that perhaps we're not more limited than mainstream writers. I think that traditional publishing venues still privilege white voices. So that's certainly true, and that's still a thing. But I think there are these other dynamics that make it more complicated now in a good way.
Great answer for a question you didn't feel like you had an answer to. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is, given Latina voices are understudied, who are some other women you would like to research? Whose story would you be excited to highlight?
Gosh, there's so many great ones. I think part of why, I guess I would make two categories, contemporary and historical. And then one, I'll start by talking about one who's contemporary and historical, and that is Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta had a documentary made about her, a biographical documentary in which she is centered as an important voice. She's, although she is, I think 90 now, she's still doing great, and she voices her own experiences and tells her own stories, and she's really fabulous. And there's still not that much published research on Dolores Huerta. I think there might be one edited volume there's just not a lot of research yet on her, and she is of great historic significance. And it would be great to be able to read, what are her papers, her letters, her communications of the past, and what do they reveal about her relationships with others. I think that would be really a neat project that some wonderful PhD student somewhere is probably already doing it, but if not, I would love to do it. In terms of literary studies, I think I would love to do more research on the writers that I was talking about today, especially the testimonios and the California women. I would love to do more research on that. And I have done research before, but not a lot, on Latinas in Hollywood, in particular, like some of the first silent film stars of the 1920s. And I would love to do more research on them as well. Those are just a few.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to say, we've gotten so many great questions. I feel like this is as close as I will ever be to being a DJ, having these really great thoughts and these questions in. I want to start to bring us to a close, and to thank Dr. María Villaseñor for joining us here today at Ohlone College at the Litton Center. This has been a really great talk and a great way to kick off not only our series of talks this semester, but also Women's History Month, as you mentioned, Dr. Villaseñor. Is there anything else that you'd like to add as we start to bring to a close?
The only thing I would say, which I said to the students that I met with last week, is I did put my email address on the slides, and you all are welcome to reach out to Dr. Livy if anybody has any questions about CSUMB. I want to invite you to reach out to me. I just think it's a wonderful university, and the kinds of relationships I have with my students are really enriching for me and hopefully for them too. And I think that I would just put in a plug for you all to consider, those of you who are students who are participating today, to consider it a possible transfer home. And other than that, just an encouragement for you all to continue to engage and think about, whose stories matter, whose stories should be told, and to tell your own.
Thank you so much. This has been a real honor and a joy to have you join us today. I'm really excited that this talk is kicking us off this semester. I want to share a little bit of information about our next event, and you'll see that on your screen now. This is the information that will be going out shortly about our next event, which takes place on April 6th, which is a Tuesday, right at this very same time from 2 to 3:30. It's a talk by Dr. Imani Kai Johnson, who's an assistant professor of critical dance studies at UC Riverside. And the talk is titled "What Street Dance Can Tell Us About Intersectional and Transnational Coalition Building." Dr. Johnson is a renowned expert in hip hop culture and b-boy culture, specifically breakdancing. So we're really excited to have her come and share her ethnographic research in that field and connect with all of you. So definitely make a note of this, and you can see there's a link in the flyer if you might want to make a note of this so you can join us on April 6th from 2 to 3:30. Again, I want to, on behalf of my fellow co-directors of the Litton Center, Dr. Michael and Dr. McCarty, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I really hope you take some of the really great material and content and ideas from this talk and bring those to your homes and to your spaces, and continue to join us for many different events that are coming from the Litton Center here at Ohlone College. So we're all done. So we're wrapped up and you're free to go about your day. Thank you again, Dr. Villaseñor.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Okay.